Saturdays at 10 p.m. on Lakeshore Public Television.
Japanese-style cooking at its best. Its ingredients, preparation, and presentation, all in perfect harmony and simplicity. Food expert Rika Yukimasa shows you how to do it and adapts recipes and utensils so that you too can prepare exquisite Japanese-style dishes wherever you are. Rika's Tokyo Cuisine.
Our guest today arrived on the literary scene when she was just 18 years old. 5 critically acclaimed novels later, Helen Oyeyemi brings us a collection of short stories in What Is Not Yours Is Not Yours. We'll talk to her about her inspiration, her belief in monsters, and how she came to write a collection that has been described as both whimsically beautiful and delightfully strange. Plus more reading recommendations and bookmarks coming up. Daughter of Nigerian immigrants, raised in England, British author Helen Oyeyemi's success came early. While still in school and studying for exams, she published her first book, The Icarus Girl. The story goes, a literary agent snapped it up after reading just 20 pages. 2 years later came her novel, The Opposite House, in 2007. Part of a 2-book deal, it delves into the world of Cuban mythology. Next came White is for Witching, described as a haunting piece of work that tells of greater things to come by an already impressive writer. That greater thing was her next book, Mr. Fox, a captivating and inventive story about love, lies, and inspiration, followed by Boy Snowbird, a finalist for the 2014 Los Angeles Times Book Prize. Now, the award-winning novelist has turned her talent to short stories. In her latest publication, What Is Not Yours Is Not Yours. Helen Oyeyemi, welcome to Well Read.
Hello, Terry.
It's very nice to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
I want to start with this, that What Is Not Yours Is Not Yours, the title of the book and the cover of the book. What do they say to you and to readers?
I'm hoping to project something that a reader can be in two minds about. I'm in two minds about the title myself. I think it's the kind of title that is uplifting and crushing at the same time. When you think about the things that you want or possibly need but can't have, but also when you think about all of the problems of ownership and how difficult it is to hold on to anything in the first place. So hopefully there should be a sense of release there as well.
And the illustration, which is just really lovely.
It's just perfect. As soon as I saw it, I knew, but Helen Yentas has designed the past 3 covers for all of my books, and I always feel as if she just reads the book and is able to pick out a central image that really sums everything up. So for me, this cover actually draws on one of the stories, Drownings, which is it has a lot of fire and water and coming back from the dead.
Yeah. And this is your first short story collection. Yes. How did you choose the stories for this book?
I wanted to write a book about keys. I had decided that I wanted to take the figure of a key and try and say something about what keys are in our lives, and by extension, I suppose, what the objects that we live with know about us in some way, because they're witnesses to so much of our everyday thought processes and to our dreams and our hopes and our interior lives. So the ways that keys can unlock minds and characters, I wanted to explore that.
You explored stories with keys and with puppets. Those
Yes.
were 2 big images all through the book. Where'd the puppets come from?
Oh, the puppets. The puppets came from a book that I read by Kenneth Gross called Puppets, an essay in the uncanny. I think that's the title. I might just go with puppets for now. It was just after I'd written the first story in the book, which is Books and Roses, and I was wondering where to go because I knew I had to do 9 stories, and after 1 of 9, it seems like just an uphill battle. I was like, oh, I have to write 8 more stories. And I was trying to think about how keys sometimes seem a life of their own, just because a key that you swore you knew where it was has vanished, almost as if it's just got up on little legs and walked away. And the book about puppets managed to talk about objects in a way that made them seem as if they could have consciousness. And so that I brought puppets in on the side of keys, basically.
Fairy tales. They're a big influence in this book, but they're a big influence in your life too. Talk about that. Where does that come from?
I think it's because they're full of so much ambiguous imagery that you can read practically anything you want into them. There's just something very, very deep about a fairy tale in terms of its sequence and its characterless characters. And I think it's like that so that you can just slip into the story yourself.
When you write, then, even, for example, these stories, do you have a fairy tale in mind when you start each one, or do you begin to write and get a story thread and then look for a fairy tale that might work with this?
With these key stories, I think it was more a fairy tale tone that I was borrowing. So there was no particular fairy tale. It was more a way of telling the story. Yeah.
The images, they're just fantastic all through this book. Where do they come from?
I honestly don't know, especially some of them are a little bit sinister. They just seemed to emerge. It was the whole process of writing it was like unlocking doors, and sometimes it was a surprise to me what was behind each door.
Do you have a collection of keys?
I do.
You do?
I do. I started
How did
with
that
a collection
start?
of keys. I was visiting a friend in Cairo, and we were walking around the bazaars, and all of the bazaars had swords and keys, and I wanted souvenirs, and swords were too big and heavy to take home, so I took keys. I took the most elaborate, decorative keys, ones that I could imagine lots of stories about, and I took them home.
Well, I've seen a photograph. There's a photograph of a tree. They were white branches with key.
Yeah,
Are those yours?
Some of the keys on the tree are the Cairo keys. Yeah.
Beautiful. I want to talk about a couple of stories, if you will, in the book. One is Drowning. It's dark. It's also kind of funny. There's some humor in this. There is a tyrant, and there are people who go off to drown. First, talk about where the story. What fairy tale or where did this come from?
The story Drownings begins with the words, this happened and it didn't happen. And it's a story that I wrote almost experimentally, thinking of the Czech version of Once Upon a Time, which is bilo nebylo, which means there was and there wasn't. So I took that line and then I thought, well, what could possibly develop from this line? How can I follow? What am I talking about when I say there was and there wasn't? And then I thought, okay, a key got burned. And from there, the story just seemed to build and build. And I had the tyrant and the drownings, and everything just came together like that. It was almost like, not automatic writing, but there was something dreamlike about it.
Was there a story in the book that was more difficult for you to write than any of the others? Like that one?
The puppet story was very,
Really?
very difficult.
How come?
I think because I had a lot of ideas about keys that I wanted to about keys and puppets that I wanted to sneak in, but the story kept rising up against the ideas. It wanted to be more story than idea, but I think I managed to get the right balance in the end.
And were there stories maybe that you left out of this collection?
No, I kept them all in. I felt that each story, I looked them all over and I felt that they each said something different about keys, so I was reluctant to leave anyone out.
I was wondering about, well, I know a question I wanted to ask you about the drownings. After you did that one, was it difficult for you to sleep at night?
No, because strangely I felt, I always feel quite cheerful if the villain gets punished. And I felt that the tyrant had got his just desserts, so it was easy to sleep.
That's okay. That's fair. Talk a little bit about imagery, both in the book and in your life. Where do you see things?
I think maybe imagery in terms of words is important to me because in real life I'm very short-sighted, so I can't really see very well. So I tend to kind of put together word portraits, and when I'm reading a book, it's the word portraits that arrest me, that I find arresting as well. So if I have even being in Barcelona and hearing about the exchange of books and roses, that immediately filled my mind with lots of images, and that was why I had to change the scale of it so that it wasn't just one book and one rose that was exchanged, but a library and a garden, and things. So images tend to sort of bloom in my mind, I guess.
And then how do you choose which ones of all of those this will make the good story?
It seems to decide itself.
Really?
I can start to write and just not really get anywhere. But if the story is in some sense true, then it just seems to flow. Children
figure prominently in these stories, and especially children who are often living without a mother. Is that true? What would you talk about there?
I don't know. I don't know if it's true. It might be a reflection of my fondness for orphan girl books as a child. I read all of them. It was Anne of Green Gables, Pollyanna, Rebecca of Sunnybrook Farm. All of the orphan girls were my friends. So maybe I'm just saying hello to them in some way.
Yeah. So talk about the characters. Do they stay with you?
Some of them do. I think that the reason why some of the characters recur in this book is because I was curious about them, having written about them in another story, and I wanted to check in and see if they were okay and how they were doing. So they would just pop up in the background of another story.
Well, and then if you look at all of your books, not just this one, what is not yours, do you have favorites?
I do. I feel
or
guilty.
Can you even say
it's
that?
It's like having a favorite child. No, it's true. I feel guilty, but I do. I love this one, but I also love Mr. Fox, because it's a book that I wrote just when I felt that I was going to give up on writing. I just felt as if I couldn't pull off whatever it is I wanted to pull off, and so I wrote Mr. Fox as if it was my last book, and I just put all of my energy into it, and I had all of the fun, and I just sort of opened up this imaginative box, and then once I had written it, I realised that I could continue writing. So it kind of, it was a sort of saviour in a way.
Well, I'm glad you kept writing.
Thank you.
You've written a lot, so you haven't really given up on writing for very long in between each one.
No, I can't stop.
I want to talk too about it. In fact, to have you read, and the first story in the book is Books and Roses, and you create this beautiful library. It's really something. I was envious when I read this.
I was envious too.
So would you read us something from that story?
So this is a description of a library at night. It's 4 books. A library at night is full of sounds. The unread books can't stand it any longer and announce their contents, some boasting, some shy, some devious.
It's such a great place. Do you have a library? You do.
I do not.
You don't?
Because I've been moving around so much.
Yeah.
I can only take a few boxes of books every time, but now that I'm settled in Prague, I'm thinking about.
Okay, so how about favorite libraries? I mean, there had to be a model for this one. There's somewhere that you've seen?
There's a pretty good library at the Strahov Monastery in Prague. Also in Prague, there's the Clementinum, which is a library that I first went to because I read about it in a Borges story. And in the Borges story, the Clementinum, I can't even say it, the Clementinium is a sort of infinite library. It has more books than can be numbered or counted, and in one of those books is the meaning of life, and in that story there's a character trying to find the book that holds the meaning of life in this Prague library. So I think that those two are probably my favorites that I've seen.
That's pretty beautiful.
Yeah.
I want to read you something. There's an author, Ann Patchett, and she once said every author has one message that she or he carries through from book to book. Is that true for your work, for all of your work?
I don't think so. I don't think it's the case for me. Maybe in the future. I think what I'm trying to do is find the message. So
Really?
maybe this is something that I'm trying to think through as I write the books. But for now, it seems as if each book has a very different character and agenda in a way.
And myth and fantasy play a big part, not just in the books, but for you also. When did that start?
I think that's just the sort of thinker that I am. I'm just quite accepting of things not really making sense. I feel more comfortable with a slightly odd situation than a really normal situation in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think you've said that you don't trust cats.
No, I don't.
Why not?
Because they are... A friend of mine was telling me about a cat who was very, very nice and pleasant when its owner was in the room with her, and then when the owner went out, the cat would look at her and hiss. And I think that that's how cats are. You just don't really know what they're thinking.
Well, we'll just have everybody who's kind of into cats tune out that part of that.
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay, it's okay. Those kinds of beliefs, we talked about the fantasy and the magic, how do they influence how you write then, if these have been parts of your life?
I don't think they have that much of an... It maybe makes my writing a bit more open. So I try to write fiction that is having fun with being fiction and just allows everything to happen within it.
Mm-hmm. And fiction it is.
Yeah.
It's some of the most marvelous kind. Are there other writers who are big influences of yours, or who have been when you began?
Yes, there's Ali Smith, who's as a short story writer. She's done just tremendous things. As a novelist, she does tremendous things. Every time I read her, I'm surprised and delighted. And
really?
I always think, can people really do this? Like, if there's a rule, she breaks it delightfully. And yeah, every one of her books holds something wonderful. So there's Ali Smith. Barbara Commons, who has retold some fairy tales. It was her retelling of the juniper tree that made me want to rewrite my own Wicked Stepmother story, Boy Snow Bird. There are others that I can't remember off the top of my head, but Silvina Ocampo. She's very, I'd call her a surrealist. She's very darkly funny, and has many strange events that the characters just calmly endure. Lewis Carroll, I love Alice in Wonderland and Always Will. Yeah, lots of a mixture of influences.
No, I'm a little amazed that you have time to read. I mean, you've written so many books, and you're so much younger than I am, and you've done it in a big hurry. Where do you find time to write and read?
It's difficult. I think that I write quite quickly. I spend most of my time reading. So the actual writing period is quite short and sustained.
So as you talk about this then, because it has been not a lot of years, all of these books, how would you say your writing has changed in those years?
I don't know. It's hard to see it from so close up, because I try to get better, but as a writer, but my idea of what is better keeps changing as well. So it's difficult to tell. I do feel like I'm getting closer to what I want to do.
You know what that reminds me of? There's something you said a few years ago that you do want to get better.
Yeah.
I want to write things. I want to write as many books as I'm allowed to publish.
Yes, that's still true.
You could have a whole lot of years left to write a whole lot more books.
Once I find an idea, I just have to write it. So we'll see. Maybe I'll stay quiet if ideas.
And is there one in the works now?
Yes.
And I won't ask, because I know that it's not cricket to do that, right?
It'll be a nice surprise, I hope.
More short stories or another novel?
Another novel.
Another novel.
Yeah.
We will watch for this.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to speak to you.
It's lovely speaking to you.
Keep writing.
Thank you. I will.
Keep writing. Stay in those wonderful worlds. Helen Oyeyemi is the author of What Is Not Yours Is Not Yours. Thank you so much for being here. It's a pleasure to meet you. When we come back, Marianne Gwynn joins me with a list of reading recommendations from a group of authors with a very unique perspective.
Visit wellread.org for more details about today's guest, Marianne Gwynn's bookmark suggestions, how to join the Well Read Book Club, and get information on past shows, authors, books, and more at wellread.org.
Helen Oyeyemi, Her roots are in Africa. She has lived all over the world, and her writing reflects that.
You know, she's part of a group of very talented young writers who, as you said, their roots are in Africa, but they are scattered all around the globe, but particularly in Britain and America. They are the sons and daughters of parents who fled Africa during the turbulent period of political revolution in the 60s and 70s.
And I, for one, am excited to hear about some of these writers.
Well, you have read some of these writers. How about that?
Actually, I have.
But before I get to them, I want to talk about her best-known novel, Boy Snowbird. This is the story of a young white woman, Boy Novak, who runs away from an abusive home and marries an older man, Arturo Whitman. Now, Arturo already has a daughter who is beautiful, very light-skinned, practically white. And then Boy and Arturo have a child, but that child has darker skin, and it becomes apparent that Arturo, his family has been passing for white. His heritage is actually African American. This novel is set in the 1950s, as I said, and it's really an astute portrayal of racism in America during that time, but it's also, it becomes a sort of Snow White fable, and it has that dreamlike quality of all Oyeyemi's writing.
It does, and one of the writers who fall into the category you mentioned is Dinao Mengistu.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
A past guest.
Yes.
Good guy.
And we loved his book.
Yes, we did.
All Our Names, the one I'm going to talk about. Dinao Mengistu, he was born in Ethiopia. His parents fled the Civil War and came to this country. Now he is a Georgetown University professor and a MacArthur Genius Grant winner. This book is about a young man from Ethiopia who goes to university in Uganda, and then he is swept up in the revolution there. It becomes very violent. He washes up in America as a political refugee. He has no identity really other than his name, Isaac. And then there's a young American social worker who tries to help him, and they discover how hard that can be for him to come into this culture. But it's not really a tragedy. It's more about the extremes two people will go to when they really love one another.
There's a thread, right? It seems that there's a thread through these books. Characters, people who embrace their past while forging ahead into the future.
You know, I would say that is also true of my next recommendation, Americana by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. Yes. It's the story of a razor-sharp young Nigerian woman who moves to America and settles on the East Coast. She is in love with a young Nigerian man, but eventually he can't handle it and he goes back to Nigeria, where he actually becomes quite wealthy. Through her eyes, we see a really stark divide between Nigerian and American culture. And we also see the nostalgia that Nigerians who have moved here hold their homeland in spite of the fact that it's not really warranted. She is also a MacArthur Genius Grant winner, and she's written a lot about the differences between Africans who immigrate to this country and African Americans. Very insightful, I think.
Absolutely, it does. It brings us to Teju Cole, another in this caliber or quality of writers. He's wonderful.
Again, and he is the son of Nigerian parents. He was born in America, then raised in Nigeria. Now he is a professor of writing at Bard College. This is the story. Open City is the book. It's about a half German, half Nigerian psychiatrist who lives in Manhattan. He's having a hard time. He's lonely. He has a lot of problems. So he decides to start walking the boroughs of New York City. I'm not just talking about Manhattan. I'm talking about Queens, the Bronx. As he does this, his memories unspool, and he also begins to realize how much things have changed after 9/11, which is when this book is set, and how much distrust Americans start to view foreigners with. One thing I love about his writing is its beautiful visual quality. He is a very accomplished photographer, and he's the photography critic for the New York Times Magazine. How about that?
That's right. No, that's right. What's the second of his?
Every Day is for the Thief. Now this one is set in Lagos, which is Nigeria's capital, a city of more than 15 million people, rife with corruption, power outages, and the sheer energy generated by millions of people striving to get up one leg up the ladder. It's about a Nigerian doctor. He returns home to Nigeria thinking that he's going to have a nice home visit, but you know what? can't go home again. This is a love-hate story about his relationship with Lagos, the energy, the corruption, and the intensity of this African urban center.
We're going to be hearing so much more from these people.
They have a voice in the literary world.
I can't go away without talking about Gestu one more time, who is a wonderful, eloquent man. We found out when he was here that he's teaching at Georgetown. You and I think we're ready to book flights and sign up for his class.
Right. And he's not the only teaching writer we have on the show.
No,
There's Ethan Kanan,
exactly,
David
Ethan Kanan.
Troyer.
Yes.
Let's go back to college.
That's fine with me. Salman Rushdie.
All right.
Come on. Who doesn't want to sit in that classroom for a little while?
I would definitely do that in a minute.
Okay. Well, as soon as we're done here, we'll head to the airport.
All right.
My treat.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
Great, powerful list. We'll see you next week on Well Read, but before we go, here's Marianne's full list of book recommendations.
Well Read is produced in partnership with the American Library Association. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter at Well Read TV.
A new team, new editorial resources.
The same objective analysis of the top business news of the day.
Every weeknight, complete market coverage.
With the business and economic stories that are crucial to you.
Nightly business report.
Coming up next on Lakeshore Public Television.
Finding any moose, let alone one with a newborn, in this terrain is a daunting challenge. But I got lucky. This is be a challenging 12 months, but I'm really excited to see how this animal survives its first year in the Canadian Rockies. Moose populations are declining, and scientists are racing to discover why. Any calf born now really has the deck stacked against it.
Tonight at 11 on Lakeshore Public Television.
On Nova, it's what makes everything, from your phone to the internet, possible. But is math an invention?
Math is the language in which we understand the universe.
Or a discovery?
It feels like there's something there before you get to it.
And is it the key to the cosmos?
That's the power of mathematics.
The great math mystery. On Nova.
Thursday at 8 on Lakeshore Public Television.
Celtic Thunder presents Legacy, a brand new live show exploring their musical journey to date. Legacy features great new showstoppers and fan favorites from traditional and contemporary Celtic music, featuring singers Keith, Ryan, Colin, Emmett, and Neil, with special guest Damien McGinty. Join us for Celtic Thunder Legacy.
Friday at 11 on Lakeshore Public Television.
International sensation Celtic Woman bring you their brand new show, Emerald, guaranteed to take you on a magical musical journey. Don't miss world-renowned dancers, pipers and drummers on stage with the angelic voices of multi-platinum artist Celtic Woman, celebrating Ireland's spellbinding heritage.
Saturday at 5 on Lakeshore Public Television.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's the Lawrence Welk Show, celebrating more than 50 years on television.
Let the amazing Annie Lennox put a spell on you. Georgia. With warm sounds of jazz, soul, and blues in the night. So baby, talk to me. Savor an intimate night of nostalgia live in concert with the sensational Annie Lennox. On Great Performances.
Sunday at 5:30 on Lakeshore Public Television.
This is Nightly Business Report with Tyler Matheson and Sue Herrera.